What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. Today I'll be going over 5 running backs I'd be trading, and this week we actually have 4 running backs I'd be trading for, 1 I'd trade away, and then a bonus discussion on a running back that I think a lot of you will be wondering about. And remember, these are only 6 players, and there's no particular order to this list. I do have an ordered list of all the running backs and wide receivers I'd be trading for up on the website and the value that I'd be looking to give up in getting them. So if you want to check that out, haven't done so already, it's thefantasyfootballadvice.com. But let's start today's video off with the stat of the day. Yesterday's stat was through the first 2 weeks, which running back leads the league in rushing yards over expectation. The answer is Kareem Hunt, and Oliver Tybee was the first one to get that one right. Today's stat: there are 6 tight ends in the league right now with over 130 receiving yards. Mike Gesicki, Hunter Henry, Travis Kelce, Noah Fant, Dallas Goedert, and who is the 6th? All right, let's talk about some running backs, and we'll start off with the 4 buy lows, then we'll go on to the sell high and the final discussion. So first up, we have David Johnson, and Johnson had a fairly mediocre game this week. He only gained 50 yards on 13 touches, but it was against the Ravens, and they're an elite defense, so it's not shocking that he underperformed. But remember what I said last week about sending trade offers the week before we want to actually get a deal done. Now, I'm okay trading for him this week and getting the deal done, but it is always a good idea to be like, I think I'm going to want to trade for him next week, so maybe I plant the seed this week. Well, we're doing that this week with Johnson. He plays the Pittsburgh Steelers in week 3. I believe the game is in Pittsburgh. Don't want to be quoted on that, but I'm pretty certain that it is. And I can't imagine he's going to have a good game regardless of where that game is being played. Pittsburgh is an incredible defense, and it's not like the Texans are going to open up that many running lanes for Johnson. So he's going to need to score a touchdown, need to break off a long run or a long reception to really hit value next week. Now, don't be sending just like ridiculous trade offers, right? Make sure that it's one that you're very comfortable with, but don't be sending some low-end running back for David Johnson. You don't want to insult the person you're trading with, but I would send a trade that you're extremely comfortable with getting accepted, and you shouldn't be that surprised if it gets rejected, right? But then if he performs poorly this coming week, which we think that he will, the owner's going to already be thinking about trading him, and they're obviously going to have you involved, and the price is probably going to be much lower next week after his second dud in a row. And I call this week a dud. I mean, 50 yards, that's pretty much a dud for what you were expecting him to get. So try and get a deal done, see what happens this week, but don't be too concerned if you can't come to an agreement this week, because again, he's probably not going to have the best game next week. Also, a side note, I know most of you know this, but you always want to be the one getting the better player in a 2-for-1 trade. It's almost always ideal getting the elite player instead of the 2 lesser players, with the one exception being building depth. So if you've had a lot of injuries on your team and you just need 2 starting caliber players and you're willing to give up an elite player to get 2 of them, then that's okay. But unless that's the case for you, just the vast majority of the time, you want to be the one trading away 2 players to get 1 player, because free agency, unless you're in a 14, 16, 18 team league, free agency is awesome. There's always 10 to 20 players that should honestly be owned on all rosters that are just free. Okay, especially if you're in a 10-team league, you should be looking to always do 2-for-1, 3-for-1 trades, not just ridiculous one. You don't just bench or put together 3 very, very mediocre players for Alvin Kamara, right? No one wants to accept that. But if you have a solid bench in a 10-team league, and even a 12-team league, and you want to package 2 or 3 of those guys for an elite player, do it. Because free agency is awesome in those formats. There are so many players that we can look at that are going to break out at some point in this season that you want to have in your bench, but benches aren't big enough. Unless you have 10 or 12 bench spots, typically there's so many players in free agency, you want to be able to trade away your bench to get these awesome starters, and then you can still get pretty nice players in the bench anyway. So that's a little thing. I know a lot of you know that, but just in case you don't. Next up, we have DeAndre Swift. I went over him last week, but he remains an elite target. He jumped up from 23 yards on 6 touches in week 1 up to 72 yards on 10 touches this past week, increasing from 17% of the running back touches for the Lions up to 38%. And just like in week 1, it was very clear they want to feature him in the receiving game. He now ranks 5th in both targets and receiving yards among all running backs. And there's no reason that won't continue moving forward, especially since his snap share is going to increase and their defense is bad. And so the Lions are going to be playing from behind. They're going to need to stay aggressive and they're going to need to put up points. So that's all a good thing for DeAndre Swift. Everything I said last week remains true. It might just cost you a tad bit more now since he did have a solid game through the air. And since, half the league's running backs are hurt right now, so healthy running backs are going to have a premium placed on them. But I would still be trading for him right now because the price is still lower than it's going to be in the coming weeks. Dalvin Cook, next one we'll go over. Week 1, he had just 58% of the snaps, and then he only out-touched Madison 13-10. But then in week 2, he jumped up to 80% of the snaps, out-touching him 16-4. In my eyes, the Vikings just didn't want to give Dalvin Cook too many touches to start the season. Given limited camp, given what we've seen from so many players throughout the league, you want to ease these guys in because they haven't really had a chance to get into football shape. But playing at least 80% of the snaps, and seeing 80% of the touches is an elite workload. And even though he scored 3 touchdowns, his owners are probably a little bit disappointed in the volume. 13 and 16 touches isn't really that much, and his reception numbers are really low compared to last season. He only has 4 total targets on the year through 2 weeks, despite averaging 3.8 receptions per game last season. And he's also averaging 13 carries per game this season, despite nearly 18 per game last year. So the volume is down, and that's obviously disappointing for fantasy. We want to see these guys getting consistently in that 17-18 touch range, which is what he was getting last year. He was getting like 20 touches a game. Not the case so far this season. So I'm sure people who drafted him are a little disappointed, especially if the Cook owner in your league has started off 0-2. Then, look for the position that they're weakest in, assuming it's not running back, right? You can't really take Cook if they're weak at running back. But if they're weak at wide receiver and they've got a decent core of running backs and you're strong at wide receiver, but you need some running backs, Dalvin Cook is not a bad name to go after because I'm pretty sure his price right now might be the lowest it is all season. The final buy low is Antonio Gibson. Talked about him last week as well, but the breakout is coming. You can't really wait too much longer to get a deal done with him. I truly believe that they're easing him into the featured role, but that he will be the 3-down back, the goal line back before the season is over. And while I always trash the Washington offense, it's not a good offense. Dwayne Haskins is not even close to as good as we thought he could be entering the league, and it does not look like he's getting better. So that doesn't bode well for the offense. But if we look at last year, they ran very, very few plays. The plays are way up as a whole this season, and they do have a better coaching staff this season. So things are still pointing up for Washington, even though they are not a good team, not going to score all that many points on average. They're better than they were last year, and I think they're going to surprise people by the end of the season with how good they become. We're just hoping that Haskins can get a little bit better. It doesn't look like he is going to, but hopefully he can. But just looking at Gibson, he played 29% of the snaps in week 1, but that jumped to 65% this past week. And then he also increased from 44 yards on 11 touches in week 1 up to 52 yards and a touchdown on 14 touches in week 2. And that doesn't seem like a lot. You're like, he only got 3 more touches. That's ridiculous. Why are you even pointing that out? The 14 touches this week made up 58% of Washington's week 2 running back touches, compared to just 28% in week 1. So yes, the touches only went up by 3, but his share of the total running back touches launched up. So if we look at snaps, he increases 36% more snaps from week 1 to week 2 and 30% more total touches, at least as a share of the total offense. This is a rookie who was used very little in college and, of course, had a very limited offseason to learn the offense and to get acclimated to running back. Remember, 77 total touches in college. That's not that much to learn a position. So they're not just going to throw him in there. 25 touches a game as the featured back in week 1. That's absurd to think it was even possible. But they made it very clear when they got rid of Peterson that they wanted to feature Gibson at some point in the season. And even though, like I said, the offense is not great, a featured role is extremely valuable, especially when it comes from a player as gifted athletically as Antonio Gibson. So I was off of him for a lot of the summer, but you need to be able to adapt when situations change. We see Geis get cut. We see Peterson get cut. And we see Peterson's comments when he left saying, hey, this kid is incredible and they want him to be the guy in the offense. We need to just look at that and say, yes, this makes a lot of sense. So he's going to be featured soon. You're not going to have very many more opportunities to trade for him at this price point. So get him before the price skyrockets. That's it for buy low, but I did want to go over one running back for sell high and then the special case I was talking about. So for sell high, it is Mark Ingram. After seeing just 10 carries and 0 targets in week 1, he had 9 carries and 3 targets in week 2, playing roughly 40% of the snaps in both weeks. Fortunately, this past week, he was able to save his day with a 30-yard touchdown run on a 4th and 1 Wildcat play. But aside from that run, he had 8 carries for 25 yards and 2 receptions for 22 yards and no touchdowns. He now ranks 30th in carries and outside the top 50 in targets among running backs. And this is all while Dobbins still hasn't taken over yet. You know, it's very, very difficult at this point to even start Mark Ingram unless Dobbins gets hurt. So I would try to get something done after this touchdown game, after he still had a decent amount of fantasy points, because when you score a touchdown, that obviously helps. But if you can't, hopefully on the next Monday night game, because everyone's going to watch this game, right? We've got Kansas City playing the Ravens. This is going to be an awesome game. Everyone's going to watch that. If Mark Ingram can go off in that game or at least score a touchdown and everyone sees that, we're selling him. I don't actually think many of you have him, so maybe this is like an irrelevant thing to point out. But if you did take him, you got to be looking into trade offers this week. And then if he goes off on the Monday night game, you got to be getting rid of him because there's just not enough volume for him to produce. And the upside isn't nearly what it was last season. The final player we'll talk about today is Joe Mixon. I'm not sure anyone knows what to do with Mixon. Not the people who drafted him, not the people who didn't draft him or now are wondering if they should trade for him. No one, right? And I'm not going to sit here and say that I know what the correct answer is with Joe Mixon. So I'm just going to lay out some reasons like for both sides really, for trading him away, for trading for him. And I'll go over just what my thoughts are in general on the situation. So first up, we need to talk about the obvious scarcity at running back. Running back was already, to start the season when everyone was healthy, a scarce position. That's why running backs go early in the draft. You've got a ton of quarterbacks, a ton of amazing late round options at tight end who are all basically hitting this year. You've got a ton of amazing wide receivers, but at running back, there are very few running backs who get the majority of the workload. And now what happens? We see Saquon Barkley, Christian McCaffrey, Le'Veon Bell, David Montgomery, Raheem Mostert, Lindsey, Akers, all those guys, and I'm probably missing some on top of that, all go down. And while they're going to miss differing amounts of time, the reality is a healthy running back right now is worth a lot, especially one who's seeing 20 touches in back-to-back weeks. So I understand that he's been bad, and he's averaging a pathetic like 3.3 yards per carry. He's getting much less work in the receiving game than we would like, but he's also been a little bit unlucky with touchdowns. He did have, 4 receptions for 40 yards in this last week, so it was really just week 1 that he didn't do that great in the receiving game. 4 for 40 is something that we should be proud of for our running back to get. Like, if my guy gets 4 for 40, I'm happy with that, right? So he had a decent amount of work in this last game. I'm not saying he's been amazing, okay? Don't put words in my mouth on that front. But these have been two really good defenses that he's faced. And we do expect this offense to slowly get a little bit better each and every week. And for Mixon to continue to get around 20 touches per game. And like I said, in the current landscape of fantasy, that's valuable. Now, what I've just said can mean different things for different people. I own Saquon Barkley in 1 out of my 4 leagues. And as you know, watching this video, his ACL is torn. He's out for the season, right? I don't have Mixon in any leagues. The way I see it, that league is the perfect one to try and trade for Mixon. Okay? I have 5 elite wide receivers in that league, all of them being healthy. And so I don't need all of them. I can start 4 of them. So every single week I'm benching one of them. And maybe that's not best for my team now that I don't have Saquon Barkley. Okay? So if I can flip one of them for Mixon, that might be a good fit for my team. But that doesn't mean it's a good fit for your team to do. If you survived all these running back injuries so far, but you're a little weak at wide receiver, or maybe one of your receivers went down since a million of them got hurt too, then it would be kind of dumb for you to trade for Mixon, right? You've got running backs. You're weak at wide receiver. So why would you even entertain the idea of trading anything away for Joe Mixon? That doesn't help your team. The same is true the opposite way. If he's your running back too, and you have guys on the bench like Gibson, Moss, Edmonds, Kelly, then you should be in active trade discussions with people who have McCaffrey, Barkley, Bell, etc. because he's your running back too. You've already got an established running back 1, and you've got options on the bench to where you don't really want to start them. I mean, Gibson, I think you can be starting. Kelly, you might be able to start. Moss, you might be able to start. They're not high-end running backs like we thought Mixon was going to be, but they're good enough to where in the right matchups, they're going to get you points. And, of course, I think Gibson's going to be the feature back, so I think he's a great option for your running back 2 spot. And so if that's your situation, why would you not say, I have a running back getting 20 touches per game who has name value, and there are a lot of running back injuries, I'm going to target one of those teams and try and acquire a position that maybe you're weak at. But if he's your 1 and you don't have that much depth behind him, then can you really afford to let him go after 2 bad games? Because whatever you look at it, his value is low right now. Okay, this is not the peak value he's going to have all season. This is not what you were expecting to get in week 1 if you were looking to trade him. His value is low, so you would be selling low on a stud. And if he's your 1, like I said, can you really afford to take that much of a discount onto your team? Why wouldn't you wait? Again, he's still getting 20 touches a game on an offense that we think is going to get a little bit better throughout the season. I don't see how that could be smart. So to summarize, in no way are we dumping Mixon. You never dump a stud player for nothing. And a trade just depends on the rest of your roster. If you can afford to buy low on him, then I'd do it. But if you can afford to trade him to an owner who needs running back because of these major injuries and is therefore willing to pay a little bit more because they need running back, then I'd try to do that as well. But don't sell your team after week 2 because you're upset with the players, right? There are an incredible amount of injuries this season, and it's only week 2. More injuries are going to happen. So you need to take that into account when you're making these offers. So those are running backs that I would be trading for, trading away. It's not a complete list, and it won't be every week. So if you want to see my ordered list of trade targets, as well as a bunch of other information, you can check that out at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. But that's the end of this one. Hope you all did enjoy. If you did, how about hitting that like button? And how about subscribing to the channel if you're new? Thanks for watching.